Time now for another vlog, and if you have a vlog suggestion that I've yet to do, be sure and check the playlist first over on the vlogs channel. Then you can send your vlogs my way if I haven't done it already. So yes, be sure and check. You can send it to me via the comment section, Twitter, Facebook, Discord. You can also DM me anonymous vlog topics if you feel so inclined. All the links to the Go Burns Nation below in the description section. Might be worth the risk, or it might not be worth the risk. Nice segue. Okay, not really. But anyways, today we're vlogging about risks. The pros and the cons to risks. Because every day, whether you realize it or not, we are each and every one of us taking a risk. Whether they're small risks or big risks. Sometimes we realize it, sometimes we're not aware of the ramifications until maybe it's too late. Or maybe it's too late and we don't even realize that there was a risk. Because, oops, game over, right? So, what inspired me to come up with this idea regarding risks? Well, last week there was an incident that occurred during a major professional golf tournament. There was a woman who was struck with a golf ball. I forgot her name, but it basically blinded her in one eye. And she could have died from it. Very horrific. And it's sad that occurred, tragic that it happened to her. It could be worse, she could be dead, so she's still alive, she can still see out of one eye. It's going to take a while for her to readjust to life, because most of her life she's, experienced the world of two eyes, and so that's going to take some doing at once the pain heals, right, from this horrific injury. It's a freak accident, but at the same time, it was part of the risk, a small part of the risk, for going to a golf game. In fact, it was in fact a risk. A small percentage. On the very rare occasion do people at golf tournaments get hit by a golf ball. Sometimes they do, and most of the time it's just a minor bruise, right? Bops them on the head or another body part. Very rarely does it go directly into somebody's eye. I mean, the chances of that are probably extraordinarily low. Most of the time, I would say that you're pretty safe from having that happen to you when you go out to watch golf. Of course, I'm not really into golf, so my risks of that happening to me are way lower because I don't go to golf courses. It's not really my thing, but I digress. The point is, even though it was a very small chance of that happening to her, the risk was still there. And that's something that should be on anybody's mind, whether they're going to a golf game, or they're going to a baseball game, or a hockey game, or going to, say, a race, for example. Wrecks happen during races, whether it's drag racing, or Formula One racing, or NASCAR, or Indy racing, or whatever. Accidents happen, and that debris can end up in the crowd, in the bleachers. Just like in a baseball game. A lot of baseballs end up going foul. Some of them go home run. Into the bleachers, into the stands where there are fans watching their team or the rival team play. And yes, people do get hit by baseballs. That is part of the risk of going to a baseball game. So yes, most definitely a risk factor there, more or less. But I thought that it would be kind of cool to take a step back and think about the risks that are taken every day in our life. The decision to get up, for example, that's a risk because you get out of bed and you could end up stepping on anything. I mean, if you have kids, maybe they like to play with Legos, and maybe, just maybe, you didn't realize it when you went to bed, but there just happened to be a little square Lego waiting for you to step on, or maybe a spider, or a snake, or maybe even a loose sock, like a banana peel, but you're going to slip on. And, it's going to cause you to have a bad day before it even got started. There's risks every moment of our lives. The risks when we're born, and the risk of us eventually dying. So it's just something that we have to deal with every single day. And a lot of times when we are aware of the risk, it's because we're doing something that we've thought through. Well, you hope to think it through. You know, decisions in your life that could have major ramifications. Like, for example, say you're interested in somebody. You fancy this girl or this guy and you want to ask them out. And there's a risk there. The risk is they most likely probably aren't really interested in you that way. Unfortunately, that's the truth. It's not always the truth. There's always a chance that it's mutual. There's always that hope, that dream, that that person that you're into feels the same way, or at least might end up feeling the same way. So yes, asking somebody out is definitely a risk. And the reward is great if they are interested. And then you're able to go forward and go out on a date with them and start communicating with them and start developing a relationship that may actually blossom into something special. But a lot of times, unfortunately, it's a rejection. You get rejected. And it makes it very difficult for you to want to ask somebody else out the next time somebody like that comes along. But at the same time, you have to look at it the other way. If you don't take the risk, if you don't ask this person out that you fancy or into, then you have no chance at all. You can't win if you don't play. That's the risk. It's the same thing with the lottery. And even though I do play the lottery whenever there's a few bucks in it, like currently the two major jackpots in my country are each like, I think 6 figures right now, like hundreds of millions of dollars each. Now that money's not going to magically fall into my lap unless, you know, the money fairy wishes to bestow upon me, you know, riches beyond the dreams of Everest. That ain't going to happen. But I'm not going to win the lottery if I don't play. Now, the risk is I lose $2 here, $2 there because I only buy one ticket. I feel like that the fractional odds of you winning, whether you bought one ticket or 100 tickets, is very, very minute. And I also believe in fate. I do believe in karma. I believe that if you're meant to win, you'll win. And if you're not meant to win, you won't win. You know, this is the same thing that goes what we were talking about a moment ago. That if you're meant to be with somebody, it'll work out. You know, you'll ask them out or they'll ask you out because sometimes it works the other way around if you're lucky. I wish more people would ask me out that was into me. You know, it'd make it a lot easier. But I digress. But it's a risk factor, all of it. The risk that you could win, but it's going to cost you, you know, between, say, $2 and, you know, depending on how much you want to spend. And I would advise you that this is one risk you should probably spend the bare minimum on and just enjoy it and embrace the fact that there's a very real possibility you're never going to win the lottery. It does happen to people, though. It does happen. Just like there's a very real possibility that that girl or guy you're interested in might just be interested in you and might be willing to say yes. Or the same thing goes for a job opportunity. Say you're looking for a job or you're looking for a new job. You're tired of the job you currently have. And you look in the wanted ads or online or wherever they put wanted ads, and there's a job opening. And it sounds like a job you may be qualified for or a job you may want to try. Even if maybe you have no interest. And you think to yourself, well, why even bother? I have no experience there. Now, obviously, there's going to be some jobs that they're not going to hire you because, A, you're not an accountant or a doctor or something like that. But, you know, there are jobs that you gain experience on the job, right? And you really want this job, and it's possible, there is a possibility that you could do this as a career, that they could hire you, you get trained to do this particular job, and eventually it becomes the thing for you. But it's something you're interested in. A job, whether it's having a new job or a job you rather have than what you currently got. What is the harm in taking the risk and filling out a resume and giving them references and at least sending it to them, at least trying? Those are risks worth taking because you never know, because that person looking over potential employees may come across you and you may be exactly what they're looking for. Then again, you may never hear from them again. You may send them your resume. I've done it before plenty of times, and you never hear back from anybody. But at the same time, I would have never heard back from anybody to begin with if at the very least I wouldn't have tried. It's important to try. It's important to take the risk sometimes. Not all the times, because some risks are bad risks. And there's some crazy stuff that people do every day that I would personally consider to be a little too risky. For example, people that like to drink every day. You run the risk of eventually dying at a much sooner time period than you would. You are harming yourself internally, and especially if you're very irresponsible and you decide to drink and drive. And I hope that anybody that does drink is at least responsible enough not to do that. But unfortunately, there are people out there like that who choose to drink and drive thinking, oh, it'll never happen to me. I'll never get that drunk where I'll accidentally harm or kill somebody, or I'll get pulled over and be given a DUI or DWI or whatever it happens to be called. But it does happen because people believe that it's worth the risk for them to drink and drive, that they think that they haven't had enough, that they're sober enough to get behind that wheel and fool a police officer. Even if they do the sobriety test and they take a breathalyzer, they think that they can be low enough by their alcoholic level to beat the system. And it's a risk not worth taking. The better thing to do is to either A, drink at home if you're going to drink, or B, make sure you have a designated driver that will take you home so that you're not harming anybody else in the process, or get a taxi, a Lyft, or an Uber. That is definitely a risk not worth taking. The same thing I will say about, cigarettes or drugs. Now, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. Absolutely not. That is entirely up to you. The choices you make, what you put in your body, the kind of food you choose to eat, or the kind of other things you consume, like cigarettes or drugs, that's on you. That's not on me. That's not on anybody else. It's your body. It's your choice. But at the same time, you should understand the risks of smoking cigarettes. I mean, there are obvious benefits for some people to smoke. It calms the nerves for people. There are reasons why people like smoking cigarettes, even though I believe it's a nasty habit. But in the long run, I feel like it's not worth the risk, because you're going to eventually get lung cancer, and you're going to have medical bills, and your last few years of your life, which are going to be much shorter than they would have been if you would not have smoked, are not going to be very enjoyable. Slow, painful death is what awaits you by smoking cigarettes or tobacco products. Let's just say you're not a smoker. Let's say you prefer chewing your tobacco, right? There's people that do that. I don't know why. I've never understood it. It looks disgusting to me. But you do it long enough, you're going to risk, like cancer in your mouth, cancer in your throat. And it's just not, in my opinion, it's not worth the risk. And I know it's very hard to get off that stuff. I know it's a pain. I know that the struggle is real when it comes to beating addiction. I think it's something we talked about a while back in a previous vlog. But you have to think about it. Is it worth enduring that to get off of it, in order to get that out of your system in the hopes of living a better, fuller, healthier life? Saving your lungs and your liver and your body, and you, while you still have the chance to do so. Isn't that worth the risk? I think so. Because in this life, we only get one body. Even though science has come a long ways, and they've done quite a bit in the field of various health cares and medicine, and maybe one day we'll get to the point where you have a bad liver or you have a bad heart, no big deal. We'll clone you a brand new one. It'll work perfectly, 99.9%, and we'll take that liver, Mr. Burns, and we'll give you a brand new shiny one that has no issues. Maybe one day we'll have that. Obviously, it probably won't be cheap, but maybe one day it'll be just like automobile parts for vehicles, where like, oh, you got a bad intake, or you have a bad fuse or whatever, just simply grow you a new one that's, like I said, the risk of a transplant extremely low. In real life, we do have organ transplants, but the risk for that is also high. And I've heard several stories about kidney transplants that don't exactly go so well. Even if there is a match, there's always the possibility that, the recipient will reject the organ. It's a risk that both the donor and the donee have to embrace. And it sucks for both of them. It sucks for the person that's giving up the kidney because it means that it was in vain and they have one less kidney. I mean, they were going to have one less kidney anyways because they had made the choice to risk living the rest of their lives with only one kidney. And that's something that takes a lot of love right there. To do that for another human being, whether it's a spouse or like a sibling or a child or a grandchild or something like that. I mean, that's one of the ultimate gifts right there, is to do something like that for somebody else, to basically giving part of yourself to somebody. But for the other person, there's that risk as well, because they have this hope and dream of this transplant going well. I think it was something we talked about in a previous vlog, that the young woman that they got a lung transplant. In all her life, I think she was on machines, and she was a popular YouTuber, and she always lived accepting that her time on this world was probably going to be short, and she knew the risks of getting a lung transplant, but she also knew that there was the potential for reward, that if she managed to survive the transplant, if her body accepted the new lungs and eventually got stronger, that it would mean that she could live a longer, healthier life. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for her, but she took the risk. And in her case, the risk was probably worth it, because it would have probably meant her going on a little longer on the machines in that same state, struggling just to barely survive. And I feel like that when you're at that point, you're willing to take the risk, because you're like, this is living, but if I can improve my quality of life, especially if it seems like I'm at a very real possibility of dying anyways, I might as well take the chance, might as well take the risk, because if I don't, then chances are I'm probably going to die young anyways. I mean, I may live on a few more years, or maybe a decade if you're lucky, but those last few years aren't going to be that good anyways. So, unfortunately, that's just the way risks are. And it's just a struggle that a lot of people have to deal with every single day. And unfortunately, people, like I said, people make bad decisions when it comes to risks. People are willing to cut corners and break the rules sometimes in order to advance themselves, like cheating on other people. Like, I'm not talking about relationship-wise, but maybe we should include that as well, because there's plenty of people out there that find somebody else, and I'm not saying how their relationship is one way or the other, because you can't really judge everybody's relationship. Maybe they're in a miserable relationship or marriage. Or maybe they're a total scumbag and they're not grateful for what they have, and they feel like it's okay for them to cat around and sleep around on their partner, and their partner will never find out that they did what they did. But there's always a risk that they will find out. There's always a risk that it's going to come back and bite them on the ass, and it's going to ruin their life, because especially if you're married, most wives and husbands won't exactly take their partner back if they find out that they've been cheating on them. Usually it ends up with a big D, right? Divorce, and that can get rather nasty. And so that's a risk right there. And as I talked about a few weeks ago, it's a risk sleeping around with people. That's why I did that sexual education video. And I hope that proved informative for those of you that decide to watch it. Because of the fact that, if I continued going out there and hooking up with random people that I met online or met at a bar, I ran the risks of catching something. Fortunately, I didn't catch anything. but it was enough to make me realize that what I was doing really wasn't worth the risk. And even though you're driven and motivated by the fact that you are kind of lonely, you wish you had somebody special in your life, and you're just thinking about, okay, well, I may not have anybody right now, but it'd be nice to have somebody at least for a few minutes or maybe a few hours, to have something. At the same time, it's not worth the risk because you never know who you may be running into. You never know who may be out there, because a lot of people online aren't exactly who they claim to be. I think we're kind of repeating ourselves from the previous vlog, but I do apologize for that. But that's the point, though. You never know unless you take the risk. But some risks are good risks and some are bad risks. But what it really comes down to is having the information, the intelligence, the knowledge before you go into making a risk. For example, like you have two ways to cross a road, right? Major highway. You can choose to walk across the road, but there's cars going by at 70, 80 miles an hour. You run the risk of being flattened like a pancake. Or you could walk down maybe a half mile or a mile to the nearest ramp and go down the road that way. Sure, it may take you a few minutes to go that way, to walk that way to get across the road, but at the same time, it most likely increases your lifespan by choosing that choice, the smart decision to walk a little ways down the road and find a ramp and go down the ramp to get to the other side of the road, as opposed to just simply trying to walk across the highway. So, yeah, especially if you don't look both ways. Sometimes you can get lucky and do that. You just have to know the risks. You have to know when the situation is okay to walk across the street, whether it's a neighborhood, whether it's a county road or a busy intersection, or it's major interstate. You have to know the risks. And most of the time, it's not really worth the risk to walk across the road unless you're quite confident that there's no cars coming either way, or if there is a car, that they're far enough away from you to where you could easily get across the road without them, pancaking you. So, yeah. It's something we're always having to be mindful of, and it can come down to where we live, because there's always risks in different environments. For example, there's tons of dangerous animals in Australia, so that's a very risky place. There are some countries that are riskier to go to throughout the world that kind of dangerous right now, volatile. So those are countries where if you were trying to say, okay, where do I want to go for a trip? I want to go to any country in the world. What country would you go to? What countries would you not go to? You would definitely not want to go to countries where the risk factor was much higher. High crime rate, extremism, war, totalitarianism, famine, disease, terrible hygiene and all that stuff. I don't think you'd want to run the risk of going to any other place in the world that might have one or several of those issues, because you are putting yourself at risk of something happening to you. And that's why most people, not everybody, but most people, when they plan a trip somewhere else, they usually like to go somewhere that isn't potentially dangerous. Now, there's always a few out there that think, oh, it'll never happen to me. I just want to go check out this place for reasons. But at the same time, there is always a risk factor in taking a trip from here to there to anywhere. Then again, you could pick the nicest country in the world or the nicest city, and there's always a risk that something's going to happen to you. There's always a possibility. There's a risk that the plane you're on could end up going down. I mean, that's a very, very small percentage right there. But anytime you get on a plane, anytime you take a bus or a train or any form of public transportation, there's always a risk that an accident will happen. I mean, I think, what was it, over the weekend up in New York? There was a limo crash, and I think, 20 people that got killed? So yeah, I mean, there's a risk driving, being on the highway. There's a risk doing everything. There's a risk going to restaurants and having a meal. Even a restaurant that you've been at numerous times. And this is a good example of risks. There was a restaurant down the street I used to love going to. until one night I got food poisoning from that restaurant, and I was never more sick than I was that night. I mean, I was sick, throwing up, diarrhea. It was happening at the same time, and I'm not trying to be graphic here, but it was nasty. It was horrible, and I was trying my best for the next day to put fluid back into me. I was having to drink water. I was having to drink Gatorade. I was trying to put something back into my body because my body was so wrecked by that incident of food poisoning. And now there's a very real possibility I was probably the only person that was affected. Maybe I wasn't. I don't know. But what I do know is I will never risk going back to that restaurant ever again. So even something you think about that's mundane, that is, in your opinion, safe, if it's a good restaurant and it has a great Yelp review, it's no guarantee that you're not going to get a bad meal that's going to make you sick. There are no guarantees in this life except for eventually, it's going to end. But like I said, some risks are worth taking, and some risks, obviously, are not.